Hey, hi everybody. Really nice to see you this afternoon. I tried to put this? Can you still? If I just like kind of shout, does that help? Is that okay? Okay, I'll try my best. I'm here to speak to you all this afternoon about reluctant reading and reluctant readers. I wish I could say that I wasn't a reluctant speaker, but unfortunately I am this afternoon. Absolutely terrifying experience. But thank you all for being so nice as well. I thought just before I get started that I'd address the point that was raised in Johnny's talk earlier about pupils with SEN needs and whether or not they are welcome at Michaela. And I mean, the short answer is everyone's welcome at Michaela. You know, to kind of adopt a phrase that's been bandied around in London at the moment, Michaela is open. You know, we're more than happy to take on lots of children across the borough. In fact, if anything, I would say when I go to the Fair Access panel meetings, when I'm talking to other schools about managed moves, we're always saying, yes, 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 do come here, we're not bothered, we'll take anybody. And we really have taken on lots of pupils because we love a challenge and we love helping children, regardless of their needs, regardless of their background, regardless of what circumstances they find themselves in, to make really great progress. And we believe that the culture that we have inculcated in this school enables them to do so. And whilst what we do for SEN children might look quite different to what you might see in lots of other schools, it comes out of the fact that we love those kids and that we believe that they can do anything, that they can achieve absolutely anything, so long as your standards are sky high. And you know what? We want a life for those children that's more than just kind of getting on the bus to go into town and pick up their benefits and go home and sit on the sofa. We want those children to be able to read a newspaper, to be able to make an informed decision when they vote. We want those children to be able to engage with political ideas and literature and history and art and culture. And that's what our curriculum provides for those children here. Yes, some of them will be in terrible habits when they come in. Some of them will find it very difficult. But I tell you what, I have never seen a child in mainstream who can't sit still if they need to, even if they require lots of reminders and lots of attempts to get better at that. They can do it. We have a severely disabled child in year 8 at the moment who's got all sort of multitude of issues. And she is by far one of the most Michaela kids that we have. She embodies everything that we're about. She walks along the corridors and reminds people to tuck their shirt in or to sort their collar out because it's a little bit skew-whiff. She tells people that they've forgotten their pencil or they've left their work pack on the floor. She'll turn around to them at lunchtime and tell them to put their hand up and give an appreciation whether they like it or not, because she is so Michaela through and through. And I tell you what, when she started at Michaela, she wasn't that way. She did shout out in lessons. She did say things that weren't appropriate to teachers. She did do things that were wrong. But because we've helped her and because our culture and our systems are such that she is able to change those habits, she has done. And as a result, she is flourishing here. That child is able to write paragraphs about Romeo and Juliet and Joe Kirby's lessons that are amazing, that frankly I couldn't have written when I was her age. And she's doing so well. So whilst the provision that we provide for SEN kids might not look the same as what you expect, so you won't see any storyboards or card sorts or nonsense like that in our SEN groups, what we do is we really help them to learn, and they do. They're really successful. And if you still have anything, you know, any qualms about that, if you're not sure, then please do come in. Please do come and speak to our kids. You can have a look at our admissions policy. You can see that everything we do is fair and above board, and that every single child that wants to come to this school can if they wish to. So that's all I'm going to say on SEN. But if you have any more questions about that at the end or on Twitter, that's absolutely fine. You can put those to me. I'm more than happy to answer them. But we really love SEN kids here, and everyone is welcome if they want to come here. Okay, so back to reading, what I'm actually supposed to be speaking about. I wanted to start my talk off today by talking to you about a TV show. Not reading, actually. Because as any teenager will tell you, TV is basically the same as reading, but just a bit quicker. When I'm not ranting about SEN or arguing with people on Twitter or, you know, kind of at work or doing other various ridiculous, really geeky, boring things, I do occasionally watch documentaries, and which is, I admit, very fun, you know, wild, on a Saturday night watching a documentary on BBC iPlayer. I watched a documentary recently, as some of you might have seen it. It kind of piqued my curiosity. It was called The School That Got Teens Reading. And And it was a lovely programme, lots of really well-intentioned people wanting to do some really great things, going on a kind of noble crusade to try and get children to love books. And it was hilarious. There was this opening montage that was kind of punctuated with this really dramatic staccato classical violin and this very monotone narrator saying things like, there's a crisis in Britain, children aren't reading. And it was all very doom and gloom, and everyone was terrified that culture's going to die out because teenagers can't be bothered to pick up a book. And, you know, there were these kids coming on the screen saying things like, yeah, I hate reading, reading's really boring, you know, just couldn't be bothered to pick up a book. You know, the standard thing that I'm sure you will hear in lots of schools, and I'm sure you would even hear at Michaela from time to time from some of our most reluctant readers. So I would start by saying that we haven't got the most optimal reading system in the country. There are lots of things that we do that other schools do. There are lots of things that other schools do better than us. For example, I've been to see schools in Birmingham. There's a great school called St Albans Academy. Brilliant school, do really amazing things about reading. But I do think that our approach here, and in particular the philosophy that underpins it, makes what we do on reading quite unique and quite different, and actually, in lots of cases, very successful. So the thing about this TV show, Kids That, whatever it was called, The School That Got Teens Reading, was the whole presumption that teenagers find reading boring. Reading is boring, and therefore it is our job as educators to make it unboring, to try and make it less boring for those kids. And so what ends up happening in lots of schools, and I've done this myself, in my old life pre-Michaela, you know, I suppose BM, life before Michaela, it really does change a person. You know, you end up doing lots of piecemeal, nice to have, add-on type activities, because the whole point is we want kids to love reading, so let's like make reading really fun. And so what we do is we put on, for example, kind of a World Book Day, let's dress up as a book character once a year, or you get an author in to talk about reading, or you create a nice wall display. So for example, I spent hours one evening creating some little bits of card that looked like book spines, and I put hundreds of them up on my walls so that I had a kind of bookshelf effect on my wall, rather than just putting a shelf with books up. That probably would have been better, but it didn't occur to me at the time because I was in the paradigm of wall displays are great. So that's what I did. So we end up doing lots of those really kind of piecemeal things. And the thing is, whilst they're really high effort, and they're quite lovely, and they're quite nice, and I wouldn't disparage any teacher who chooses to do those things. I mean, like I say, I've done those things myself. Do they really transform a reluctant reader's attitude to reading? Do they really have the impact that we want those things to have? Or are they just kind of scratching at the surface? It strikes me that strategies like that are kind of like giving somebody a Nurofen when what they need is a heart bypass. It's not actually addressing the core of the issue. It's not really getting to the heart of what's going on. So, I find that instead of thinking of reading as something where we need to try and make reading a bit more fun, try and jazz it up, and try and persuade them to read this book, what it says, I think, it's almost like when we admit that, we're saying that yes, teenagers, you are right, reading is boring, and, you know, Conan Doyle, Chaucer, Orwell, Keats, Shelley, Shakespeare, yeah, they are just really boring, so don't worry about that, you know, but would you mind, please, just reading this little book about football? Go on, it's not that bad. You know, as if you're trying to, like a parent putting broccoli in their macaroni cheese to try and convince them to eat vegetables. You know, the fact is that we shouldn't be pandering to that. We shouldn't be trying to get them to find it not boring, because it's just something they're not used to yet. And if we shift the paradigm, if we shift the way that we think about reading, and instead of thinking, how can we make reading fun? How can we make kids love reading? We need to shift the paradigm towards something a bit different. And that, and what we do at Michaela, is the paradigm of seeing reading as a habit, and as reading as something that everyone has to do, and that if they find it hard, and if they find it boring, then that's okay. But in the long run, that's better for them. You know, making kids eat vegetables is better for them than giving them buckets of KFC every night. We're like personal trainers, which is something that Catherine said before. You know, we're just trying to get them to get better and get them to improve. And that is something that I don't see in many schools. It's just the idea that, well, tough. Yes, you might find it boring, but you're going to have to do it because it's good for you. Okay. So at Michaela, we have a 5-pronged approach to reading. There's kind of 5 parts of our reading strategy that I think coming together, working together, actually have a really massive impact in the long run. So, what are they? Now, my notes are very scruffy, so actually I don't know what they are, to be honest. Notes that I do. So the first thing is that this is something that's got to come from the top of the school, from the senior leadership team, is that first you must have a robust phonics strategy in place from year 7. Now, I'm talking predominantly to secondary teachers here because I am a secondary specialist. And actually, I think that, you know, we've got a lot to learn from primary specialists on this, because I do think primary teachers often do brilliant things for reading, and then the second kids walk into a secondary school, it all kind of goes out the window because we don't keep that up. But for those who do come in on low reading ages, of which at Michaela 1/3 of our pupils do, it's very important to put in place a robust phonics programme from the beginning. So in order to do that, you have to timetable it in. And that might mean that children have to miss out on some subjects. You might look at your school timetable and think, well, is woodwork really crucial for kids who can't read? And sadly, in some schools, people do think that that is crucial, because actually woodwork is all they're going to end up doing with their lives. So why bother teaching them to read? Let's just give them woodwork instead. You know, but if you're a bit braver than that, you might think, well, maybe they can come out of technology, or maybe they can come out of another subject such as PSE, or at Michaela, we actually choose to take them out of French, which is quite a controversial one. But if you speak to Barry and Jess, they'll tell you that it's very difficult for children to learn a language if they don't have a basic grasp of their own native language. So we take a term out of the timetable where children get up to 4 hours a week of phonics instruction in lieu of French lessons. And that really helps them to catch up. And then from January, they can go back into French and they can start learning French from that point. Some children will need longer than that. And so our general philosophy is if they need to be back in French by the end of year 7. We try and get them in January if we can, but some of them might need a bit longer. But hopefully by the end of year 7, they'll all be there. There are lots of really great phonics programs in place that you can purchase and use and get training for your staff on in schools. There's Sounds Right, which I think is really brilliant. There's Thinking Reading, which is really brilliant. And there's Ruth Miskin's Fresh Start as well. I think all of these programs are excellent. And if you want to see those things in action, obviously we actually currently do Fresh Start here. You're welcome to come and see that in action at Michaela. But there are lots of other schools around the country that do those reading programs probably better than we do, right? So it's not something that's completely brand new. But the first part of a strategy is that you must have a phonics program in place. The second aspect of a reading strategy is to think about what pupils are doing in your lessons across the curriculum. So one of the things that's really great about Michaela is that we're always rowing together, as quite a few members of staff have said today, and I think it's really nice actually that we're all kind of repeating these same refrains. Not like we're robots, but I mean we are a bit, but you know, in a good way, so yeah, we're all rowing together in that we really do take a consistent approach when it comes to reading in lessons. So a question I always ask people to consider is how many words on average is the average child reading in a day at Michaela? So, and in any school for that matter. And so I would say at Michaela it's about 10,000. And it would be worth you thinking about in your schools how many words are your pupils reading every day. Because, for example, if you're using PowerPoints, and this is one of the reasons I detest the things, and I'm quite upset that I've got something projected behind me, like it actually offends my soul a little bit, is because, you know, you've just got a picture of a sunset on a slide with a couple of words underneath it, and that's all they're doing for sort of 10, 20 minutes of the lesson, where actually that time could be much better used with children reading reams and reams of writing. That's going to have much more of a long-term impact on their life. So we have booklets in lessons, which are a double A4 page spread. That's roughly one lesson, and that's about 1,000 to 2,000 words of reading that children would do with the teacher. The numbers, the lines are numbered so that they can be pointed out, right, we're on line 16, Johnny pick up. They read out loud with a teacher, everybody following along with a ruler along the page, so that they can all stay at the same place, and also so that we can hold them to account. So you know that if their ruler's on the wrong line, they haven't been following, because it's really important that every child's following and focusing on every word. And the thing is, we don't just do that in English lessons. You'll see that in any lesson, any subject at Michaela. So you go into a science lesson, a maths lesson, a music lesson, an art lesson, a history lesson, and you will see the same approach being employed, which is really powerful because it means that cumulatively, the cumulative effect of reading so many words throughout the day really improves children's literacy. Another principle just to point out on that is that it's not absolutely crucial that pupils understand every single thing that they read. So at the moment I'm reading Oliver Twist with my Year 9 group, and they're a delightful class. They're some of our weakest readers in the year. And, you know, they don't get every single one of Dickens's jokes. I mean, they don't get every single one of my jokes. But that's fine, some things go over their head, but the fact is they're reading something that's such a high standard that they are taking the vast majority of it in, even if they're not taking 100% of it in. And so I think sometimes teachers are a bit afraid to really push SEN kids or pupils with low reading ages because they're frightened they're not going to understand it. But actually, if they don't understand every single line, that is okay, as long as they're getting the general gist. I mean, all our kids know who Bill Sykes, Fagin, Nancy, all of those characters are. You know, even our really, really weak kids, and the people I was telling you about earlier with really severe SEN, you know, she can tell you who Tybalt was, she can tell you who Romeo was, and she knows the plot of Romeo and Juliet, and she even has memorised a few lines of the prologue. So, you know, if she can do it, anyone can. There's no reason not to challenge children with really challenging texts. Whoops, demerit for me. Okay, so the next part of our reading strategy, the third prong, sorry, I'm really waffling and I've not got much time, so I'm going to just go quite quickly. The third strand is the class reader strategy, which I have spoken about before and I have blogged about before, but essentially, during tutor time, all children read the same book with their teacher. So we buy 30 copies of the same text. It's delivered in a box to the classroom and is organised on this absolutely insane schedule by Joe Allen, who stood over there. Absolutely mental, kind of just crazy, like you need to read pages 72 to 79 on Wednesday the 13th of February, otherwise the schedule will fall apart. It's really amazing, but it does mean that everybody can kind of keep up and can get through lots and lots of text throughout the years. And the thing about those texts is we deliberately choose books that we don't think children would pick up off the shelves themselves, and we think that have some kind of cultural value. They just read those books in form time. There's no writing associated with it. There's no, I mean, they obviously will have a bit of discussion, especially when it's a really good bit in the book. You know, you talk about that with your class, but it's not necessarily a kind of an analysis exercise like it might be in an English lesson. It's more of a just, let's just read tons of stuff. Why not? It's really good to read loads. So the kinds of books that feature on that list include things like To Kill a Mockingbird, Dracula, The Hunchback of Notre Dame, and so on and so forth. So there's a whole number of things there. And the funny thing about all of this actually is that now that with some of our pupils who've been doing this for 3 years, who are now in Year 9, when I teach them English lessons, when they come in and I say, right team, we're going to be doing Oliver Twist today, you know, they're not fazed by it in any way. They're just like, okay, miss, you know, Rulers on line 1, ready to go. Whereas I think in my old school, certainly, you know, whenever I even mention the idea of, right, you know, really sorry guys, but we're going to have to do a bit of reading, you know, it would just be, it would just go down like a lead balloon. I thought they were about to kind of attack me. For suggesting they should do something that requires, you know, an iota of concentration. But the thing is, you know, here, kids just aren't fazed at all by reading. They're not afraid of it. That fear that's associated with reading heavy amounts of text is just gone. You can thump down a massive copy of David Copperfield on the desk and then don't feel worried by it. So the class reader strategy is working very well so far, and that's the third part of our strategy. Fourth part is what we do with the weakest readers. After school, they attend reading club, which is absolutely brilliant. It's such a lovely time of day, and it's run by English teachers. So the weakest readers in each year group go to a little club after school, and they read lots more texts with an English teacher who's, again, just kind of dragging them through it so that they get through them. And those texts we tend to think of as being more of a halfway house between the absolute classics and more kind of modern fiction. So they're the kind of thing they wouldn't necessarily read on their own, but and aren't as kind of heavy as things like Oliver Twist and David Copperfield. So on that list, you might see things like Agatha Christie and Inspector Calls, The Woman in Black, and they really like those. And it's just they're reading extra texts, and it makes them feel really successful because actually they are reading books that the other pupils in the year group aren't, and so they actually have covered more kind of literary ground in that time. And then the fifth aspect of our strategy is the library and making sure that we've got it stocked with really good stuff. So every single book in our library, which is just down that corridor, but it's closed today, sadly, has been hand-chosen by either myself or Joe Facer. We have this amazing book supplier in Birmingham called Peter's Books, so I would highly recommend it. It's like a day out. It's magical for somebody that loves books. And we've looked through every single book that's gone on our shelf. So whilst that doesn't necessarily mean that it's just full of copies of Silas Marner and dusty old copies of War and Peace, you know, there are some kind of modern fiction books in there, things like The Fault in Our Stars, but things like, what's it called? I always use this example as an example of a ridiculous book that you see in secondary school libraries. It's called Captain Underpants and the Perilous Plot of Professor Poopy Pants. So that doesn't feature, and nor does I Wiped My Bum with a Hedgehog. That is a real book. That doesn't feature in our library either. So yeah, we try and make sure that our library is stocked with really great books so that they're not just reading about, you know, farts and football, which is left to their own devices, what they probably would do most of the time. And so that means that all children are expected to have a library book with them, and that means that they carry it with them at all times, and they read it at home in the evening. And we can't necessarily measure exactly what they've read, or make sure or hold them to account for reading at home, because obviously you don't know, but we do incentivise them to read by talking about the importance of it constantly, and also by giving them merits for reading lots and lots of books. So kind of to summarise then, rather than starting from the principle that reading is boring and should be made fun, we believe in making reading a habit. The impact of the combination of these strategies is massive. Our school feels like a place of reading, where children think and talk about books often, and where success in reading is the norm. No child is too shy to read aloud. No child fears or severely dislikes reading. No child avoids reading at all costs. All children read every day. All children come to love it and see its merits. And all children understand the power that books can have to change their lives. And that's that. Thanks. Right, should we have some questions?
Okay, Katie, I'm just going to give you the general SEN ones that we've had throughout the day.
Excellent.
Lucky you.
Yeah.
Any ADHD diagnosed children, how do they cope? That was in Johnny's speech, so probably in reference to the behaviour.
I think actually the structures and way that we do things at our school really helps those children. I think stability, a very predictable environment is much more used to them than the unpredictability of a chaotic school. So they understand very clearly the connection between action and consequence. And I think that actually does help them to get into good habits. We have had plenty of ADHD children here who, frankly, I don't tend to always say things like that to staff, but staff haven't noticed that child has had ADHD because they just adapt quite quickly and are so well behaved. So I think the culture, what was it Joe said, eats everything else for breakfast, eats SEN for breakfast. Is there anything that culture does not have for breakfast? It has quite the big breakfast every day. Okay, any more questions? Thank you.
Okay, another one. I've learned this new acronym, SCLN. I think that's Speech, Communication and Language Needs.
Yeah.
How do you get students with that to really understand the text they are reading? They read 2 pages, but they don't understand.
Well, we have a really good system of getting children to annotate the text that they read as they go, with different coloured pens. So they use a black pen to circle words that they don't know, and the teacher will pause and give them definition to that word straight away. We then will drill them on that vocabulary throughout the week so that they can really understand what's happening in that part of the text. So it's kind of simultaneously helping their understanding and improving their vocabulary. Yeah, I mean, what I would say is that it's not something you can necessarily fix in one lesson. It's a long-term strategy, trying to improve children with speech and communication difficulties. It's over a long period of time. They require lots of revisiting, lots of drilling, lots of practice, and all of those things combined can really help them to understand the text. But yes, I'll admit that in the moment they may not necessarily understand straight away, but after time has been dedicated to that, they will be enabled to understand things better in the long run.
Should we take that question from the floor? Yep.
Hello. Yep.
We heard earlier that there's no TAs and that budget is used to free up teachers in their timetable. What if a student with an EHC plan has a requirement for one-to-one TA? Do you have any of that?
Well, we have extra teaching staff. So they would be able to have small group intervention or one-to-one intervention, which we do actually have, but with a teacher rather than with a TA. So it's far better quality instruction. Any more questions?
Okay, just a little one. How do you pay for all the books?
Oh yeah, that is a bit of a nightmare, to be honest. Again, so what have we done? I mean, you know, lots of big borrowing and stealing. No, I'm kidding. So we do use a lot of our pupil premium budget, for example, on books, because I can't think of a better use for that money. We also use a lot of the money that we don't spend on support staff, so that money can be redistributed to books as well. Essentially, it is difficult. You know, we have a few of our governors in the audience, and they'll be able to attest to the fact that, you know, money is not something that we have in abundance, but we are able to find it for books because, frankly, it is our #1 priority. I mean, remember, we don't have smart boards. You know, we're not using loads of technology constantly. So all of the money that's spent on those things in school, we just spend on books. You know, we basically spend money on teachers and books. That's pretty much it. And chairs. Any more?
Yeah, let's have this gentleman.
So the authors of the books that you choose, from what I've heard, are quite a few. There's dead white authors.
Yeah.
What about kind of authors from different cultures or, you know, characters that the students who are from ethnic minorities can identify with as protagonists? What kind of importance do you place?
Okay, so I think there's... Oh, sorry, yes. So the question was about dead white men, and what about children who might be able to identify with writers from other cultures, and so on. Okay, so there's two ways I'd kind of answer that question. Firstly, I would say that we do have lots of writers from other cultures in our reading curriculum at some stage. We have loads of stuff. In fact, I think at the moment, Leah, at the back, you're reading Things Fall Apart, aren't you, with your tutor group? Yeah. You know, we do Mandela. We've done a whole bunch of things. So it does feature in our curriculum, firstly. Secondly, and when I say that, I mean it features both in our English curriculum and in the class reading curriculum and in the reading club curriculum. So it does kind of feature throughout. But secondly, I would say that children, you know, the ideas that are in these books transcend race, gender, age, disability. They transcend all of those things because they're the things that unite us as human beings. And so, you know, regardless of the background of a writer, if their message is something that we can all empathise with, hold on to and understand, then children can relate to it regardless of their background. So, you know, we have children who are Jamaican who can really relate to the Artful Dodger, unfortunately. You know, and we have children who are from Nigeria who can relate to, you know, Shelley's Frankenstein. I mean, there's so many different great characters and so many different features of them that everybody can relate to, and it doesn't matter what your background is. You can totally get on board and understand the ideas of characters and authors and writers from different cultures, and from our own culture and from this Western culture.
And there's a question from that gentleman over there.
Hello. Yeah.
Maybe it's a bit unfair to very especially to you, but I've sensed a bit of an undertone of being derogatory to your parental community, local community. I mean, they're not all like that.
No, of course not.
You're looking at often third, fourth generation, high aspirations, you know, highly articulate, living in £500,000 houses. I mean, do you want to comment on that, or is my impression incorrect here?
I think your impression is incorrect. I mean, the question was, am I being derogatory to our parents? No, I mean, I think, you know, in any school, you have supportive parents and you have unsupportive parents. That's the way it is. I mean, the parents that I deal with, you know, I have good relationships with because, you know, I spend a lot of time sorting their kids out, so they tend to like me. But yeah, I mean, no, I wouldn't intend to be derogatory towards parents at all. Any more questions? Yes.
There seems to be some conflation every time we talk about SEN.
Mhm.
Behaviour automatically comes into the equation, and I'm quite. This is in the wider community, not this school. There seems to be a huge unnecessary conflation. Every time we talk about SEN, it results in a conversation about behaviour, and actually we're talking visual impairments, hearing impairments, children that are impeccably behaved.
Yeah, I understand. I mean, that sits uncomfortably with me too. I mean, we have children here who've got hearing impairments. So, sorry, I'll just repeat the question. So, the question was, there seems to be some conflation between SEN and behaviour, and that instinctively, as soon as we talk about SEN, we are implying that SEN children can't behave, or that it's perceived that it's just poor behaviour. But actually, there are other issues going on. So, for example, a child with a hearing impediment may be impeccably well behaved, and that's not necessarily linked. Yeah, I mean, I don't like that conflation either. But what I would say is that, you know, a lot of the things I have read about how to support children with hearing difficulties often become an excuse. And I would say that that links back to what Johnny's saying. And I'm not saying that as, oh, you know, well, of course they shouldn't have to do X, Y, Z because they can't hear. I mean, of course, I'm not saying that. But the point is that sometimes people will say, well, you know, the reason that she didn't feel confident enough to write that paragraph is because she can't really hear you that well. And I just don't think that's the case. So I think we just need to be careful about not just behaviour, but any type of excuse, academic as well. So just never to conflate those two things, and just to believe that, you know, regardless of what the situation is, every single child can make great progress. Yeah, great. All right, thanks.
Thank you.
Cheers.